iron triangles, issue networks, and coalitions. And this is basically the way we study kind of these various networks of interest groups and how they form and work with government. It's very important for us to understand this because we're obviously in the context of a large group of organizations that are pressuring members of Congress or your state legislature to pass something. As advocates, we have to know how to work with other people and understand the mentality of other organizations that might be opposing us or might also work with us. And we have to understand how these networks work. So we're going to take a look at the transition from iron triangles to the idea of issue networks. And this is somewhat controversial within the study of interest groups, but for our purposes, this is a pretty good way to take a look at it. So here's your classic example of a textbook iron triangle. The iron triangle basically is 3 points that work together. You have congressional committees, which are people who make the decision making. You have executive agencies, which function in the same capacity as those congressional committees on the same policy issues. And then you have interest groups that are interested in government public policy in relationship to whatever is at issue in that congressional committee and those executive agencies. So those 3 different entities work together to basically be able to create public policy and ongoing kind of execution and implementation of public policy at either the national or the state level. So what are we talking about when we talk about these kind of composition, the people that are involved with the iron triangle? So you can have all types of people, right? So interest groups, you can think in terms of business groups, labor groups, what we've termed public interest groups, those things that are worried about kind of collective goods for a lot of people. You can have individual kind of businesses, individual non-for-profits, consultants, and then also because of the fact that many federal funds are funneled through state and local governments, state and local government officials spend a lot of time lobbying at the national level, as do local officials at the state level because of the amount of money and the amount of mandates and restrictions that are placed on them by either the state or the federal government. Government officials, from their vantage points within the iron triangle, obviously the committees where the work is done is the most important area of the iron triangle, but there might also be people that are what we would call political entrepreneurs, those people who take up the cause of a specific issue and use that issue kind of to further their political career. Within the executive branch on some issues, particularly high-profile issues, you're going to see somebody from the executive office being interested in this. The president might take a look at that. So, recent years, obviously, President Obama was very interested in health care in 2009, 2010. Currently, President Trump kind of interested in health care now. So most issues fly below the radar, and it's really just the executive agencies and the bureaucrats that deal with that issue that are part of the iron triangle. And then you also might have other people just listed down there, things like think tanks, some foundations, the random academic. We're good for something every now and again as experts and journalists. But for the most part, the interest groups and the government officials are what you're going to see. Now, what's the purpose of this iron triangle? Right? The idea is this. What we want to do, let's just assume that we are part of an iron triangle. What we want to do is basically make sure that the decision making takes place out of sight of most of the public, right? So we work together with these committees and subcommittees, and we work together with bureaucratic agencies, and we basically try to just make sure that policy, we tinker around the edges, making sure that it's good for us, and we try to lobby on behalf of things that are good for our advocacy group, right? The smaller the group of people making decisions, the better off we are. Think about that for a second. If we want to keep the status quo, the smaller the group of people that are involved, the better off we are. Why would that be? Because the more people that you add into the decision-making process, the more likely it is that decision-making is going to spin out of control and we're not going to be able to get what we want. That's the beauty of the iron triangle, right? The idea that we kind of keep this policy making down to this small group of people. We quietly bargain behind the scenes. We accommodate each other, right? I may have people that I oppose, but we kind of negotiate and make sure that we all get a little bit of what we want, and things are pretty good, right? So, the word that's usually used here is the idea of mutual accommodations. Everybody gets what they want, right? So the example down here at the bottom is the idea of water resource policy. Now, this is kind of a classic example of an iron triangle. So you have House and Senate committees that deal with what we call public works projects, right? Building stuff, right? Whether they're roads or bridges or wetlands, whatever the case may be. It's good for members of Congress because they get projects back in their districts. And what does that allow them to do? It allows them to credit claim and get reelected. Good for them, right? They want to get this stuff passed. The Army Corps of Engineers, so they're the kind of bureaucratic agency side. The more of these kind of water resource, dollars that are, basically given to this area of public policy, the more projects that they have. So they're happy, right? And then think about local officials and interests. This allows them to get more jobs for the companies, for the constituents. It helps those people that are running for re-election at the local level be able to, again, take credit for something that's being built. We worked with the federal government on this program, and we got this, this new ditch built. And then also think about construction firms that are interested in these dollars coming from the federal government as well. So that's kind of a classic example of an iron triangle. Now, the key here, again, and I want to emphasize this, is to minimize conflict, right? The fewer groups involved, the better off we are. The less people we have to negotiate with, the less compromises we make. Also, the less public kind of involvement, the better off we are, because once we open this up to outside pressure, the more likely it is that somebody's going to be able to challenge the status quo, right? So the beauty of the Iron Triangle is that this takes place out of public sight for the most part because it's non-controversial, nobody really cares about it, and a couple of groups make decisions. Now the question is, how does this all happen? Why does this stuff take place outside of public view? Well, basically because, we talk about Baumgartner and Jones in some other sections here when we're going to talk about the iron triangles and so forth. There's a differentiation between what we can call serial and parallel processing, right? And I always like to use the example of young children, toddlers, when you have them at daycare and it's playtime. And they're all sitting around, and if you watch them play, they might have a series of blocks or some Legos or something else that they've got around. And they're all playing, but they're not playing together, right? That's called parallel play. And essentially that's what Congress basically engages in. Now, I'm not making the analogy here that Congress is the mentality of a bunch of toddlers, but they essentially, because of the fact that there are so many things that need to be done, at any given point in time, there are a lot of different committees and subcommittees that are dealing with various problems, and they're dealing with them in parallel manners, right? So we can take a look here at the House of Representatives, and right there you see the amount of different committees that we have that are out there. On top of that, just think about education and the workforce. There are a whole bunch of different subcommittees that are associated with this as well, right? So at any given point in time, there are a lot of people working on a lot of different issues, and basically Congress, every member of Congress is not worried about every issue. Now, when something does come to the public attention, then it moves from the kind of this parallel play or parallel processing to what we would call serial processing. So there are a couple of issues that Congress is working on at any one point in time. So, at the beginning of the Trump administration, really kind of the serial issues that are being worked on are the issues of healthcare reform, tax reform, and kind of increasing the military budget. There are a bunch of other things that are going on here, right? So those are the couple of issues. Congress can only deal with a couple of issues on a broad scale at any given time. The rest of the stuff takes place in subcommittees, subsystems in these iron triangles, right? So the question becomes, like, how do we move from an iron triangle to what we want to talk about, the idea of issue networks? Well, basically what happens here is that there's been a huge growth. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here. Huge growth in the amount of advocacy organizations over the last 30 to 40 years. One is that, a lot of money has flowed in to help new organizations that are in the public interest, right? So they have been countering, say, for example, on behalf of environmental groups, on behalf of consumer groups, various other things, been countering business, right? Which traditionally was the only types of interest groups that were involved in Washington. Then you've seen a huge growth in the amount of government since the 1960s. So the more government programs there are, the more groups are going to organize to preserve those government programs so that they can continue to get their goodies, right? They can get their material incentives that they want out of these things. So that's led to more growth. And then finally, as there have been more organizations, everybody else feels the need to basically counteract them by forming more organizations as well. So individual firms have now hired lobbyists, whereby there might only be a couple of big things like the National Federation of Independent Businesses or the Chamber of Commerce. Now individual firms, even things like these relatively new kind of technology companies like Uber and Twitter, who have been particularly reticent to kind of get involved in public policy, have now realized that they have